are on the road must have a code that you can live by, and so become yourself, because the past is just a goodbye. Teach your children well, their father's hell did slowly go by, and feed them on your dreams, the one they picked, the one you know by. Don't you ever ask them why, if they told you you would cry, so just look at them and sigh, and know they love you. And you of tender years can't know the fears that your elders grew by, and so please help them with your youth. They seek the truth before they can die. Teach your parents well, their children's hell will slowly go by, and feed them on your dreams, the one they picked, the one you know by. Don't you ever ask them why, if they told you you would cry, so just look at them and sigh, and know they love you.
I don't care if you never come home. I don't mind if you just keep on rolling away on a distant sea. 'Cause I don't love you when you don't love me. You cause a commotion when you come to town. You give them a smile and they melt. Having lovers and friends is all good and fine, but I don't like yours and you don't like mine. I don't care what you do when I'm home. I don't care how you get your delights. I'll leave you alone, I'll just let it be. I don't love you and you don't love me. I got a problem, can you relate? I got a woman, call it love pain. We made a vow, we'd always be friends. How could we know promises then? La 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 la. I tried to love you for years upon years. You refused to take me for real. It's time you saw what I want you to see, that I'd still love you, but just love me. I got a problem, can you relate? I got a woman calling love pain. We made a vow, we'd always be friends. How could we know that promise? 1, 2, 3, 4. Grady mama, where you been so long? Grady mama, where you been so long? You been hiding out, I know that's true. Grady mama, sure need you. Grady mama, where you been so long? Standing on a corner, looking for you, babe. Standing on a corner, looking for you, babe. Lord have mercy, I cannot see. Grady mama, coming back to me. Grady mama, where you been so long?
Good evening. Welcome to the annual PAA Memorial Service. My name is Terry Sullivan, and I am going to be the Mistress of Ceremonies this evening. I'd like to welcome those of you who are here in the ballroom at the Hyatt Regency in New Orleans, and also welcoming those of you who are watching us virtually. Each year we meet to remember our colleagues who have passed on and to recall how they enriched our lives and their contributions to demography. And before we start, I'd like to give special thanks to the other members of the Memorial Committee, David Swanson and Jenny Brand, both of whom worked hard on this. And I'd particularly like to note the PAA staff, Danielle Stout and Betsy Alifagnas, who worked very hard. And thank also the technicians who have arranged to have us amped up and with a good virtual connection here in the ballroom. So I'm going to introduce our deceased members in alphabetical order, and we have invited a PAA member to speak on behalf of each of them. The first person we're remembering this evening is David Alvarez, and speaking for him will be Rogelio Sanz. Rogelio?
Good evening, and it is my pleasure to be here to speak about David Alvarez. David Alvarez, a very unique scholar, sociologist, demographer. He received his PhD in sociology from the University of Texas in 1981. He was doing very important work on religion and fertility in the Mexican-American population. Wrote a very important article that in demography that really highlighted his work in this area. And when I say that he was a very unique individual, that he was not only a professor, he was also a person who was really in many ways using data for social justice before the word and the term social justice like we use it today. He also had a theology degree, so he was a minister as well, so a very unique individual. I first met David when I was an undergraduate student at Pan American University. Now it's University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley. So that was in the period probably about 1978, 79, that I met him. And he was known as a very, very successful and very caring dean. A lot of, in universities throughout the country, we hear the concern for student success. He was already on the front line of doing that. Mexican-American University Hispanic Serving Institution, where students, Mexican-American Latino students accounted for about 85-90% of the student body. And David was very instrumental as making connections with students and pushing them to make sure that they succeed. Some of the people, such as Romualdo Juarez, sociologist who was a colleague of David at Pan American University, and later became president at Texas A&M Kingsville, recalls the important work that David played also not only in mentoring students, but mentoring administrators, Latino and Latina administrators. At that time, there were very, very few, and he really helped pave the way for Latino and Latina administrators to join the ranks. With respect to me, and I remember the first time I had met David, he was no longer teaching. But occasionally he would come to classes and speak. And I remember just the passion that he brought in terms of talking. He was talking about an article that at that time, 1973, that had appeared by Rodolfo Alvarez on the psychohistorical experience of Mexican Americans, and a very passionate overview that he gave. And it was for many of us Latino students, sociology students, undergraduate, we really were seeing a role model, someone that you could see the passion that he brought, the care that he brought, and so forth. And I remember also him talking about his experience that he had working as a demographer in the analysis of the lawsuit Doe versus Plyler. That court case went all the way to the Supreme Court in 1982, and he was very instrumental in providing the demographic analysis for kids, because at that time Texas was saying that kids that were undocumented should not be educated under the public expense. And the city of Tyler was trying to charge tuition, something like $1,000 a year for undocumented students to go to school. Esteban Flores, who is a sociologist, retired now from, he's in Denver, and he recalls also he was mentored by David Alvarez at Pan American University when he was an assistant professor there, and he remembers then David working on that case, and in the testimony, David was critiquing the very poor methods of the opposing report, and he was saying if that paper would have been turned in my class, I would have given them a D minus, a D like a dog instead of the B. And then he went on through very systematically laying the groundwork and the faults of that particular study. And this was a study, a court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he played a very important role in providing the demographic data and analysis. He was also a person, like Esteban Flores also says, that he was a great mentor to him as well. He was intimidated, David asked him to teach a class with him on the 1980 census that was coming out. And Esteban was saying, I was so intimidated because here was David, senior scholar. He was more of a formal demographer, and I was kind of shaking, but he remembers that wonderful experience that he had. And that there was also a student, a graduate student, that had accused Esteban of being a communist. He was red baited, and David went, talked to the president, and everything was taken care of. My last semester that I was at Pan American University, I was majoring in social work and sociology and getting ready to go to graduate school, apply. And then I was taking this technical report writing, and I was so stressed for time. And then I was trying to drop the class, and but the professor said, no, you can't, because you're going to get an F because you're past the deadline date. And I had talked with David. He went to talk to the professor, and eventually then I was able to drop the class without a penalty and then finish my degree and so forth. And there were so many people that knew David that played that very important role in terms of providing that role model as for students, for researchers, as well as for administrators. And he will be tremendously missed. He is already tremendously missed, and the important role that he played, particularly among that first generation of Latino administrators. So in Spanish, we always say, for the person who dies, we say the name David Alvarez, presente, that he continues to be in our heart and in our minds, and that his presence and spirit live on. Thank you.
Remembering Tom Birch will be Frank Travato.
Thank you. It's an honor to do this and to remember Tom Birch. He had a very long career as a sociologist, demographer, and I'm happy to say and proud that he was one of my teachers when I was at University of Western Ontario. I'll say a few things about his background and then move on to my own reflection of Tom. He received his BA degree in political science from Loyola College in 1956 and eventually went on to Princeton to do his PhD. And then from 1970 to 1975, Tom was an associate director of the demography division at the Population Council. He had a number of other academic appointments at various universities, including at Marquette University from 1960 to 1963, and at Georgetown University from 1963 to 1970. In 1975, he moved to the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, and he was professor of sociology there for 25 years until his retirement in 2000. At Western, Tom played a significant role in establishing a PhD program in social demography, and also served as chair of the department from 1983 to 1985. And I'm proud to say that I was one of those students in the program of social demography and among the early cohorts to graduate from that successful program. After his retirement from Western, Tom moved to the University of Victoria, where he was adjunct professor. And in 2013, the Canadian Population Society recognized Tom with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his outstanding contribution to demography. He's recognized internationally for his outstanding research contributions to the areas of fertility and family planning, and also family demography. As well, he made important contributions to methods for the study of families and households, remarriage, kinship analysis, and life course trajectories. Among his many publications, his works appear in leading scholarly venues, including Demography, Population Studies, and the American Sociological Review. He has published several books. In 1980, he edited Demographic Behavior, Interdisciplinary Perspectives on Decision-Making. And later, in 1987, with John Bongartz and Kenneth Wachter, he co-edited Family Demography, Methods and Their Application. More recently, in 2018, Tom published models-based demography, essays on integrating data, technique, and theory. In this groundbreaking work, Tom emphasized the idea that demographers could build on the vast amounts of data and excellent technical methods at its disposal to build a strong theoretical edifice on the field's traditional empirical foundation-based approach. He made important contributions not only to the field of demography and population studies, but also to all the students that he taught over the years, and that included myself. I remember him meeting Tom back in 1976. I was a senior undergraduate student at Western, and I was wanting to take a course in demography, so I enrolled in his seminar on fertility and family planning. And I have to say that for me, that was a rather transformative experience. Tom really was very influential in my thinking and developing as a social demographer, because I pursued that career after that course and went on to do graduate studies. In particular, what I remember about Tom as a teacher was his ability to explain concepts, very difficult ideas, in a very easy way that people could understand, or the students could easily grasp and understand. I remember, for example, his discussion about the famous study by Ansley Cole at Princeton, with whom he studied on the European Fertility Project, and how he described, for instance, the famous Cole indices that were developed to study the fertility transition in Europe across the countries, etc. That was really fascinating and mind-opening for me. What Tom did, essentially through his excellent teaching and his ability to stimulate us to think beyond what was presented in class, was that he was able to instill the importance of not only attending and participating in the courses, but also to do self-study, to go beyond the work that was presented by Tom in class. He often pointed out to us, the students, that difficult research problems are solvable through quiet, dedicated perseverance. That was really important, and it was a really important message for all of us. His research and teaching stimulated many students to pursue research interests in family and household demography. He served as the primary advisor to 8 PhD students and 5 MA students, and all of them went on eventually to successful careers in universities and research institutes in Canada and abroad. Tom is remembered by myself and all that knew him, that had the good fortune of knowing him and being taught by him, as an inspirational colleague and influential teacher. So he will be missed by all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Lisa Stroschein is going to remember Heather Dryberg.
Thank you. I had the honor last year to speak about the passing of Eddie Ebanks. Eddie Ebanks had died. His widow was in the room. She attended virtually. And I'm here today to now talk about the memorial for Dr. Heather Dryberg. When I talked last year, I recalled the length of time that I had known both of them. Heather in particular, we had gone to graduate school together, and we had many years where we would visit one another. We lived in separate cities in Canada, and so when I had opportunity to come to Ottawa, I would go and spend time with her and Eddie, and similarly, when Heather would come to town, she'd come and visit me. So this is an entirely, sad occasion for me, because I would not have expected that my friend, who had just recently become a widow, was now herself to no longer be with us as time, as COVID made it possible, as it receded, that I had anticipated seeing her again, and I now know that will not be. I do have a few brief remarks, and I'll just say them here. So Dr. Heather Dryberg passed away suddenly after a stroke on December 30th, 2022, at the age of 65. She was predeceased by the love of her life, Dr. G. Edward, or Eddie Ebanks, who died in 2021 after 17 wonderful years together. She is survived by her 4 children and 6 adoring grandchildren. Heather was born and raised in London, Ontario, to Dr. Robert and Joy Drawberg. She was loved by her close siblings and their partners, Sharon and Brian, Dean and Lynn, and Pam and Kevin. She was the beloved aunt of many nieces and nephews, who she also loved dearly. Heather was an inspiration to many, including myself, as she completed much of her schooling with 4 young children. She was loved. She received her undergraduate and master's degrees from Western University and a PhD at McMaster University. All of her degrees were in sociology, and it was her love of learning that brought her and Eddie together. Heather moved to Ottawa in the year 2000 and then began her career in the civil service as an analyst in Statistics Canada. She then rose rapidly through the ranks. When she retired in 2020, she was the Director General of Census Subject Matter, Social and Demographic Statistics. She had many accomplishments during the course of her career. Her research often focused on advancing the well-being of women in Canada and globally. She did important work on teenage pregnancy, women in the fields of science and engineering, and on internet use. Heather was an athlete who found great joy in the outdoors. She had many adventures, cycling, skiing, and hiking. She also loved playing tennis, and this passion then, in retirement, led her to serving on a board, a nonprofit board associated with tennis, which she enjoyed tremendously. She loved giving back to the community. She had a very strong sense of social responsibility. A fun fact about her is that she had always dreamed of building a log cabin. With a handful of library books, a strong will, and the hard work of her family, she built a cozy cabin on the cliffs of Georgian Bay in Cape Chin that she called Northwinds. She enjoyed many summers there with Eddie and with her family and friends. We will remember Heather's contagious laughter, her kindness, her gentle spirit, her generosity, and her sense of adventure. She was a wonderful bright light, and she will be missed.
So I am speaking for the late Tomas Frejka. Dr. Frejka was born in 1932 in Czechia, and his early childhood was disrupted by the experience of World War II. His father, Ludwig, who's a politician and an economist, fled his native country and spent the Second World War in Great Britain, where Tomas was educated in boarding schools. Later on, his father was sentenced to death in 1952 in an anti-Semitic show trial. Tomas made his way into studying demography during the 1950s and the 1960s. But when there was a social and political opening in the Prague Spring, he and his wife were able to go to Chile for his first international position. He worked partly with the United Nations, and then began a much more expansive international career, spending much of his subsequent life in New York and in Mexico City, where he was a senior representative of the Population Council for Latin America and the Caribbean. He also was a senior population expert at the UN Economic Commission in the 1990s. and he retired in the 1990s and moved to Sanibel Island. But that was not the end of his contributions to demography. Tomás Freca was known for a truly encyclopedic knowledge of demography, both in terms of subject matter and in terms of the countries with which he was familiar. He was particularly well known for his breadth of knowledge on fertility, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, but also in other parts of the world. These contributions had a significant impact on the profession and on the strategies and policies that international organizations followed. After his so-called retirement, he was a visiting professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Miami. And he continued to be actively engaged, including in a fair amount of editorial work. He was well known as an excellent editor with a fine eye for detail. He edited the International Migration Bulletin in the 1990s, and later on made many contributions to international encyclopedias and to various comparative works on fertility dynamics and fertility. His 2004 book on childbearing trends and prospects in low fertility countries, a cohort analysis, was one highlight of this work. And he also was the prime mover of a 3-volume tome called Childbearing Trends and Policies in Europe. I'm also reliably told that one of his favorite pastimes was making people laugh, and that with a wide network of friends, he was well known for his Joke of the Month Club, in which he searched far and wide for a joke that would make many people laugh. And so I think he would appreciate it if he got a smile from all of you this evening in his memory. So now, remembering Gavin Jones is Terry Hull.
I'm very pleased to speak on behalf of Gavin's 3 closest friends, Tony Reed, Peter McDonald, and Valerie Hull, and myself. We have tried to capture some of Gavin's history in a few words. When Gavin Willis Jones died in Perth, Western Australia on August 27, 2022, we lost one of Australia's foremost scholars of demography, development economics, and Asian studies. Born in Armidale, New South Wales, during the Second World War, Gavin built on his training as a star athlete to achieve academic success with first-class honors in economics at the University of New England in Armidale. He came of age when demography was focused on international panic over explosive population growth, and Australians were increasingly orienting their interests away from England and toward the close Asian neighbors. He later recalled that his interest in demography was piqued by population lectures given by Eric Wilmington at the Geography Department. Despite pressure from his economics professor to cleave to that dismal science, Gavin was attracted to the relatively young and vibrant demography department at the ANU in Canberra. Always an adventurer, he left Armidale to undertake PhD studies under Mick Borey, from a New Zealander who headed the department. His thesis topic was suggested to him by a recent graduate of the department, Jack Caldwell, well known to PAA members, who had just completed his PhD on the population of Malaya. Jack said, "I finished the population, you can do the labor force." And soon Gavin and his newly married wife, Margaret, were off for a half a year of field work in the dusty archives and conducting small surveys across Malaysia, which at that time included Singapore. In a later memoir, Gavin related a story of how he and Margaret were members of the immigration reform group in Australia campaigning against the White Australia policy. There was an immigration minister, Hubert Opperman, who argued that there was no resentment in Asia about Australian immigration policy. So Gavin and Margaret put together a small survey and went around interviewing Malaysian secondary students and graduates about their knowledge and attitudes about the policy. In an article they published in Australian Outlook, they reported that Malaysians were both very knowledgeable and very resentful about Australia's racist law. Later, they learned that the Department of Demography had been approached by the government complaining about the publication, but Professor Borey never mentioned it to Gavin. Gavin was in a cohort of demographers who would later become the foundation of many of programs of population studies around the world. These included Ian Poole, J.D. Allingham, M.V. George, Farhat Yusuf, and Yun Kim, who will be spoken about next. Later in life, Gavin reflected that his decision to go to the ANU was a turning point in his life. With his PhD in hand, he was recruited by the Rockefeller Foundation-funded Population Council in 1966, following a recommendation from Professor Borey. The Jones family spent 3 years in New York. Ever the athlete, Gavin entered into a number of marathons. In 1967, in the iconic Boston Marathon, which draws thousands of runners from around the world, he came in 30th with a time of 2 hours and 32 minutes. He was always very proud of this. His CV doesn't mention all the marathons, but probably it should. We know that from the anecdotes that he pounded the pavement in many cities, including the very hot and humid Bangkok and Jakarta marathons, during one of which he collapsed about 30 meters from the end. He still got up and tried to make it across. You could see in PAA meetings of the time, which used to have fun runs, Gavin would always be in the front of the pack, chatting with colleagues right to the finish line. Gavin drew great satisfaction from compiling one of the most lengthy and varied curriculum vitae in the discipline of demography. The document available to the authors of this note was compiled in 2021, and it's not complete. The statistics on his publications over the period from 1964 to 2021 reveal both a very steady pace and a wide range of topics. He had 4 single-authored books and covering population, education, and development. He also preferred to work with collaborators, and he produced 10 collaborative monographs and 21 collaboratively edited collections of papers. Most impressive is the list of over 240 scholarly papers published in journals and books. Typically, at the end of the list of 240 is a small, modest apology saying not listed are about 25 book reviews, which I have never kept a record of. Listed separately are conference and working papers spanning 5 pages and associated with a plethora of institutions that Gavin had either visited or worked with over the years. The boy from the Australian bush had come a long way when elected in 2002 to global leadership as chair of the Paris-based Committee for the International Cooperation and National Research in Demography, CICRED. Many of you may remember CICRED. Peter MacDonald at the same time was elected as the future president of IUSSP, but following IUSSP practice, he served from 2005 to 2009 before becoming president from 2010 to 2013. What did 2 Australians have that made them good candidates to head these international and largely European-dominated organizations? Their answer is practicality and common sense, but More than that, like Jack Caldwell and Mick Borey before them, they shared an Antipodean trait of deep belief in global citizenship. In Singapore, from 2003 to 2014, Gavin started a new family with Henny and a new circle of university, tennis playing, and family friends. He was a central figure in the Asia Research Institute and was acting director on Tony Reid's retirement. He was also in the sociology department and the National University of Singapore more broadly. He organized ARI, the Asia Research Institute's first public showpiece, Asia Trends, with a conference on ideal and reality in Asian marriage, and one of Ari's first Southeast Asian graduate student forums. Being at one of Asia's key hubs, he was in ceaseless demand for keynote lectures and conferences, which helps to explain the switch in the Ari period from monographs to articles and book chapters arising from these conferences. Throughout his ANU career, Gavin was an active member of the ANU Indonesia Study Group and helped to organize some of the annual Indonesia updates and advised leaders of the Indonesia Project. Even after he left Canberra for appointments in Singapore and Perth, he retained his links to the ANU as emeritus professor in the School of Demography. Days before his death in Perth, he spoke to me about plans to visit Canberra and to attend the 2022 Indonesia update. He knew that the School of Demography had his name on the office door. The prospect of spending a week or so on campus with new generation of PhD candidates was attractive, and he said he would try to arrange a visit. But alas, that was an ambition that did not eventuate.
And now Sojung Lim will memorialize Yun Kim.
Good evening. My name is Sojung Lim, and I'm a director of Yun Kim Population Research Laboratory at Utah State University. Maybe you could see that I never had a chance to work with him. Okay. Dr. Thomas Yun Kim, he was a pioneering researcher and dedicated educator and a beloved husband, father, and grandfather. Passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 88 in New Jersey, where he lived close to his daughter. And I heard from his family that he was kind of expecting. So they just celebrated 60-year anniversary, and right before his passing, and also his son, when his sons visited him, he was kind of, told them, be strong, everything will be okay, and then it's kind of anticipated, and I had a chance to meet him in the multiple occasions, and I heard about his name a lot because our population lab is named after him because his family generously donated. We had an endowment. He was truly dedicated to our department and our university and left a really legacy. And I heard that he has health issues, and he was a little over 80. But my first impression, I don't know whether I could say that, is alert. It's very sharp, intelligent. He talk about people, never forget about the names. I was really kind of impressed. Wow, okay. And we celebrated our 50th anniversary of our population lab several years ago. And then his whole family came, traveled from Hong Kong and New Jersey. And he said, and then this year we are celebrating 55 years. Actually, when I talked to him last year, he said, I'm going to Utah to celebrate. And then he never just took a break from work. I heard from his wife that he kept working, but his wife thought he may work too much, okay? And he was born in 1933 in Korea, and he experienced the Korean War as a teenager. And then I can imagine how determined he was to come to United States, and like Utah, long time ago, where very few Asians there, and he's just not a prolific researcher. He was dedicated educator, made a big difference. I heard from his colleagues that he never fear to fight with the colleagues for students. And then I heard that whenever students needed money to travel, he found resources. I wish I could have the ability like him. And he was a faculty at Utah State University for more than 40 years, and he founded a population lab there. He's a truly demographer at heart. And then we are a small, private-owned, funded population research lab, but we are one of all these population labs and the only one between Colorado and California. And after he served more than 40 years in Utah State University, he also served as a provost at the Far East University in South Korea. And in my mind, he was amazing in a way that he was activist. Everywhere he went, he was the driving force for organizing and networking people. And then he worked with the United Nations and the World Bank, and then he was really counseling to the governments to make a really the practical policies to improve people's lives. And also he was organizing Asians in Utah, also Korean Professors Association in the United States. And I was able to attend his funeral last month in Salt Lake City. And I was amazed by his lifetime achievement as a scholar. But to me, more impressive, important thing is that his kids talk about him. He was there when fishing together, and he was a great golfer. And to me, I thought he lived a really full life. Just beyond career achievements, he was family man, beloved husband, and then really remembered by loving father and grandfather by his family. To me, it's like really inspiring that I want to live up to. Thank you.
Carmen Miro will be remembered by Joseph Potter.
It's an honor to talk about Carmen Miro. She died at the age of 103. She was born in Panama in 1919. Her father was a poet. Let me go just over a few biographical highlights of her career. She was a true pioneer in demography and population studies. At the age of 30, she became the director of the Panama Statistical Agency, and then the director of the first Panamanian census, which was in 1950. She was the founder and director of CELADE, the Latin American Demographic Studies Center, that was founded in 1957, and she was there until 1976. She was president of the IUSSP from 1973 to 1976, the first female president of the union. She led the International Review Group of Social Science Research on Population Development for 3 years, starting in 1975, and then became executive director of PISPAL, the Program of Social Research on Population in Latin America. She was awarded the World Population Prize by the United Nations at the International Population Conference in 1984. I want to say a few things about CELADE. That this is only a little bit of all that people could say, but that it had an enormous impact in training. So many of the professionals involved in population or demography in Latin America spent time at CELADE and studied there. Carmen taught in the curriculum and set demanding standards for both the students and the faculty. One of the signal contributions that came about through Selade was her efforts to bring social scientists in. Demography had been a lot of formal demography, indirect methods, and all that sort of thing was their initial strength. But in the later years, she brought in social scientists that had an enormous impact in terms of the development of the social science in Latin America. A third thing to mention about Selade, and Carmen in particular, is the role that she played during the 1973 coup. She stuck her own neck out, protecting people, hiding people, helping people to get out of the country who were in danger from the military regime. After stepping down in 1976, she continued to teach and build institutions. She took great pleasure and pride in her work in Cuba with CEDEM, the center there, and her enthusiasm and joy at going to work with the Cubans was enormous. She also had an important role in the whole training effort that took place in China in the late 70s, and herself went to teach for weeks on end in remote places as part of that program, which was being supported by the United Nations Fund for Population Activities. My opportunity to work with Carmen came very shortly after I finished graduate school, when she asked me to be her assistant on the IRG, or the International Review Group, which was being set up at the Colegio de Mexico in Mexico City. In that role, I came to know and appreciate her insights, her work ethics, her personality, and her amazing ability to deal with people of all levels and ranks. She never seemed intimidated, and she very graciously spoke truth to power. Whether that be the heads of donor agencies or other forceful personalities such as Bernard Berelson and the already mentioned Jack Caldwell, both of whom were members of this small international review group. Looking back, Carmen Miro played an important role in the emergent population field in the 1960s and 1970s that is now the subject of revisionist histories. She rejected neo-Malthusianism and overly enthusiastic or simplistic versions of family planning. I want to close by just with three quotes. The first is something that she related to me, and it's something that Frank Notstein said to her sometime in the 1950s, when there were discussions in Latin America that would eventually lead to the founding of Selade, but General Draper and all kinds of people were involved in these settings. But Notstein's advice, who was head of the population division of the United Nations at the time, to her was, Carmen, show your temper, but don't lose it. Her own anti-neo-Malthusian aphorisms are two, and I thank Laura Wang for the translation. The first is, there are no population problems. What there is are populations with problems. And second, it is not true that the poor are very poor because they have more children. The poor have many children because they are poor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve Murdoch will be remembered by Michael Klein.
Thank you. Like many, I knew Steve Murdoch before he knew me. I cited him in my work, in my master's work in the early 1990s when I was looking at population change in Kansas. Later on, I learned worked closely with Steve, first as a representative of a local state data center network and business and industry data center. And then later at the Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research at UTSA and at Rice University. I also had the opportunity to work with him as a student. But it really wasn't until at Rice that I really became closer with Steve and learned a little bit more about him. Unfortunately, as many of y'all have heard, Steve passed away only last Friday after a long goodbye from Alzheimer's. He was born in Ferguson Falls, Minnesota on June 2nd, 1948, and raised in Milner, North Dakota. He was the son of Raymond Harold Murdoch and Lois Dietzler Murdoch. And Steve's father, many may not know, was sick much of his young life and passed away when Steve was 16. I imagine that being raised essentially by a single mother in a small town in the Great Plains shaped his later scholarship and work in public policy. There are many whom we honor tonight and in years past who may have had more profound influence in our profession than Steve, but few of us are known outside of our profession. Not Steve. Texas Monthly, the premier magazine of Texas, once ranked Steve among 25 of the most influential Texans and described him as the Jack Webb of statistics, just the facts man. He was proud of that moniker, and he worked hard to gain the trust of those on both sides of the political aisle, from Democratic Lieutenant Governor Bill Hobby to Republican Governor, then President George W. Bush. Those of us who were closer to him knew his true political leanings, though his opinions were probably more nuanced than any simple description can provide. Ultimately, he was an empiricist and wanted to provide the best data and analysis available so that good decisions could be made. Steve earned a bachelor's in sociology from North Dakota State University in 1970 and went on to earn a master's and PhD in sociology from the University of Kentucky. After a stint serving as the director of evaluation for the Comprehensive Drug Program in Miami-Dade County, Steve returned to his alma mater as an assistant professor in sociology in 1975. While at North Dakota State, Steve worked closely with agricultural economist Larry Listritz, who actually just passed away this January, to develop some of the earliest work in socioeconomic impact assessment, working on the analyses of projects ranging from water resource and energy resource development and eventually low-level nuclear waste. In his early work, Steve developed economic and demographic population projection models in order to project potential population change for impacted areas. In 1977, Steve moved to Texas to teach in the departments of rural sociology and sociology at Texas A&M, where he remained for the next 27 years. At A&M, Steve earned the rank of professor in 1980 and became a Regents professor in 1997. He also held several leadership roles within and outside of the university, including the Center for Energy and Mineral Resources and the Texas Real Estate Center, both at Texas A&M. He continues his collaboration in socioeconomic impact assessment with Larry Lestritz, as well as economist Lonnie Jones and rural sociologist Don Albrecht. At A&M, he also continued his work in applied demography by providing research analyses of a variety of different public policy concerns, including, among other things, housing, demand for outdoor recreation, college enrollment, and the farm crisis. In 1980, he became director of the Texas State Data Center for the state of Texas. He remained in that role until he was nominated by President George W. Bush to become Census Bureau Director in 2007. It is as the director of the State Data Center that Steve extended his expertise to governors, legislators, school superintendents, business leaders, and others, and led the coordination in Texas of the 1980, 1990, and 2000 census. He also led the development of the Texas estimates and population projection models, and with that, Governor Rick Perry appointed him the first official state demographer of Texas in 2001, although for all intents and purposes, he already served in that role. He made many hundreds of presentations to desperate groups almost every year. These presentations were probably not necessarily earth-shattering to many of us, but in a way, his presentations were a way of browbeating Texans, particularly those in power, to understand that Texas was and is changing, and that educating Hispanic and African American Texans would not only benefit those populations, but all Texans and Texas's future. Murdoch spoke of racial ethnic diversity long before it became a concern of public policymakers. As he always said, the Texas of today is the United States of tomorrow. In early 2000s, State Judge John Dietz cited Steve's work when declaring Texas public school financing unconstitutional. Steve published several books, book chapters, journal articles, and articles in the popular press over his long career. Among those publications, you will see as co-authors the names of countless researchers, programmers, administrative staff, and others who helped put those publications together. Many of those folks worked with Steve for over 20 years, and some continued their work in Texas and beyond. Anyone who worked with Steve knows that he could be a hard driver, but his method had a purpose: to ensure that his analysis withstood scrutiny and decision makers had the best information available. In 2004, Steve moved the Texas State Data Center to one of the largest Hispanic serving institutions in the country, the University of Texas at San Antonio. At UTSA, he established the Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research as a venue to provide applied demographic, socioeconomic impact research for nonprofits, governments, and other organizations. More importantly, at UTSA, Steve contributed again to the field of demography by establishing the first, and I believe the only, PhD program in applied demography. Many of the graduates of that program are now working at the United States Census Bureau, at INEGI in Mexico, as state demographers of other states, and other international statistical offices. At UTSA, Steve also hosted some of the earlier applied demography conferences. Steve moved to Washington, D.C. in 2008, and he held the census director position for about a year. He was immediately faced with operational challenges and cost overruns, but worked hard to navigate those issues to ensure that 2010 census would be on a good path for his successor. He returned to Rice University in Texas in 2009 and became the founding director of the Hobby Center for the Study of Texas. At the Hobby Center, he directed the first analysis of the potential impacts of the Affordable Care Act for Texas counties, researched housing and housing change in Houston and surrounding areas, and completed the second and last book of his American Challenge series and third and last book of his Texas Challenge series. Steve retired to Lake Travis in 2019. Steve is survived by his sister and brother and their spouses, and his wife of 27 years, Mary Zai, whom he adored. Mary also gave him a son, and more importantly, a grandson he never had. I always kidded him that he skipped over the challenges of being a parent. But he adored George Farrell, who was his step-grandson, and was very proud of him. Steve was a great mentor, colleague, and friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Guillermina Hasso is going to remember James P. Smith.
It is an honor and a privilege to celebrate the contributions to the growth of knowledge made by our dear colleague, Jim Smith. Jim was born in Brooklyn, got his bachelor's degree at Fordham University in New York, and then his doctorate at the University of Chicago, where he studied under Gary Becker, obtaining his PhD in 1972. He then was an assistant professor at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York, didn't stay there very long, was lured to the West Coast to Rand Corporation, where he spent the rest of his life. There he became Director of Labor and Population Studies and Distinguished Chair in Labor Markets and Demographic Problems. All his life, Jim was motivated by a desire to deeply, deeply understand what I consider three sets of phenomena: health, wealth, and time allocation. And this was his whole life. But then if you look more closely, you discern three distinct periods of activity. It seems to me that the first period was largely dedicated to time allocation, wages, earnings, wealth, and importantly, race. His second period was the period where immigration, it seems to me, was the driving force in his scholarship. And it was during that period in immigration that I got to know him. And it was during that period that he, along with three fellow scholars, founded the New Immigrant Survey data gathering enterprise. And also during that period that he co-led the National Research Council's panel on immigration. And by the way, that panel on immigration became the foundation for a white paper issued by the Council of Economic Advisors. I believe 2007, but don't quote me, it could have been 2005. It was when George W. Bush was president. Incidentally, a fantastic document, which I require my students to read. His third period, the focus was aging. And it was during this period that he joined with Richard Sussman and others and assembled what became the foundation for the health and retirement surveys, and importantly, took them worldwide, so that there are now HRS everywhere in the world. And if you look on the web, you can see immediately all the recollections and memories and thanks for all the help that Jim provided. Well, with those contributions, you expect some wonderful statistics. And he published over 400 papers. His H index is 87. He was elected to the National Academy of Medicine. He was elected a fellow of the Society of Labor Economists. He was given the Ulysses Medal by University College Dublin. And on, I won't bore you with any more, but these are just the outer markers of that inner life well lived. Now, some of us in PAA, for some of us in PAA, NIH has been like a guardian, providing support for this growth of knowledge, for projects big and small. We can think of Jim as having had an exemplary NIH career. A member of the study section, the Social Sciences and Population Studies section, which reviewed the projects that then garnered support from NIH, winner of 2 merit awards, and of course, multiple research grants during that very long trajectory that was his life. I will remember Jim for two things. One is the clarity of mind and his obvious joy in laying out an argument. And then secondly, the serenity with which he countered opposition. It was always the syllogism. It was always the argument in the Aristotelian sense. It wasn't you're right, I'm right, or think of this author or that paper or this paper. It was the ideas and their logical cohesion and progression. Well, as it turns out, those two qualities are qualities enshrined in the motto of the Jesuits. And not surprisingly, Fordham is a Jesuit university. This goes back to the founder, Ignatius of Loyola. The motto was, suaviter in modo, fortiter in re, which in English means gently in manner, but strongly indeed. Thank you, Jim, for having been such a marvelous colleague, for your contributions to the growth of knowledge, for your friendship and collegiality. And thank you all very much.
Jerome McKibben is going to remember Edward Stockwell.
Thank you. There are many people who believe that if you open the dictionary, the word curmudgeon, you would find Ed Stockwell's picture there. And I'm here to tell you it was all just an act. Ed was probably one of the most caring, supportive, nicest people I've ever met in my life. He just hit it very well. Ed was born in Newburyport, Massachusetts, June 11th, 1933. Went to Harvard for his undergraduate. During his summers at Harvard, he would go back to Plum Island and work as a lifeguard, which is where he met his future wife, Jan, who they had a 64-year marriage with. He then went on, did a master's degree at University of Connecticut, PhD at Brown University. Then spent a little time at the Census Bureau, then went back to UConn as a professor. Now, at that time, his good friend, Ted Grow, had already come to Bowling Green. And as the story goes in the department, Ed was trying to get Ted to come out to Connecticut and build a demography program there. And Ted was trying to get Ed to go out to Bowling Green, help start a demography program there. Well, Ted won that argument. Ed went to Bowling Green. Ted used to like to say that was the only argument ever won with Ed Stockwell. And they had a very, very successful 30-year collaboration and basically built the demography program at Bowling Green State University. In the realm of demography, Ed's probably best remembered for writing the first condensed edition of the Methods and Materials of Demography, as well as numerous articles on infant mortality, third world demography. He was forever writing, applying for grants, doing paper presentations. But no matter how busy Ed was, he always had time for his graduate students. And as we would all find out later, the success and better career of his graduate students was actually the most important thing to him. Again, he just hit it well. He took great, great pride in having graduate students who went out and had successful careers, and there was a legion of them. Don Adamchak, who went to Kansas, Karen Laidlow at Indiana University, Lynn Wombold, long career at Esri, Linda Mortizio for the government of the Philippines, Jean-Claude Prévost, 30 years at the Census Bureau. This was the most important thing to him, no matter how busy he was. His belief was he was to take raw talent, us, and help refine and develop us. And Ed had an ability to see a person's potential, no matter how deep it was in them. And he would, in a very patient, also very tough and demanding, but very patient way, help bring that out in a graduate student, help them become the best demographer, I dare say the best person they could possibly be. Ed also had a compassion for students who had to struggle and fight for the opportunity to better themselves. He realized that not everybody could just go right into college, right into grad school, go get a PhD, but it was a personal struggle. He was not above, when times were tight for certain grad students, finding some odd jobs around the department and give him $100 or so out of his own pocket, help make ends meet at the end of the month or something. I can never remember a time when Ed did not have time to help his students. He would go to the conference with us. He would help us critique our presentations, our papers, always trying to improve and get to the next level. And he and Jan would open their house constantly for not only faculty parties, but grad student get-togethers. Even after we graduated, there was 2 more of his graduates in town. There was a dinner party at Ed's house. One of the things I'll always remember is I wandered into a study once, and on the wall, he had a picture of all of us doctoral master students he had, copy of our dissertation, and mementos of our time with him. And I was really touched by that. And that's what told me that this guy wasn't nearly as tough as everybody thought he was. He was one of the, I think, really great professors to really help nurture grad students, and didn't care who you were, where you came from, what your background was. He treated everybody as equal as he possibly can. And I can say personally that any success that I've had in my career is in no small part a direct result of having Ed Stockwell as a professor, a mentor, and most importantly, a colleague and a friend. And I'll read kind of late, so I'm gonna keep it short, but he was, I think, probably one of the finest human beings I've ever met in my life. Thank you.
Remembering Chirioth M. Shasindran is Barbara Entwistle.
Good evening. It's really a privilege for me to honor C.M. Suchindran, whom we all knew as Suchi. Nobody knew how to pronounce his other names. He was the professor of biostatistics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he was on the faculty for 46 years. Suchi died unexpectedly 3 weeks ago on March 25th at the age of 80. So Suchi was born in Kerala, India in 1942. He studied mathematics and statistics at the University of Kerala. In 1967, excuse me, I'm gonna put my glasses on now, he was awarded a Ford Foundation scholarship to pursue a PhD at the School of Public Health at UNC, where he studied under the mentorship of Mindel Sheps. You all know of Mindel Sheps because PAA has an award named after her. Suchi was her last student. After receiving his PhD, Suchi joined the UNC faculty and became a fellow of the Carolina Population Center. Suchi was a statistical demographer. His early work dealt with the estimation of biological parameters of human fertility from incomplete or otherwise limited data. Another area of contribution was to the theory of multi-state life tables and their application to various demographic processes. He had a series of papers examining the effect of individual level risk variability on life table functions. With Krishnan Nambudri, Suchi co-authored a textbook, Life Table Techniques and Their Applications, published by Academic Press. Suchi also made significant methodological contributions. He was a longtime co-investigator and the lead survey statistician on the complex design of the National Longitudinal Survey of Adolescent to Adult Health, AdHealth. For almost 25 years, he advised AdHealth investigators and the thousands of AdHealth data users on the appropriate analytic techniques needed to correct for design effects. Suchi was very generous with his time and sharing in his knowledge and expertise. He PI'd and was program director of an NICHD-funded T32 training grant for 35 years. Any of you who do T32s know what that means. where he trained generations of graduate students. He taught graduate courses in demographic techniques that were core not only to his T32, but also to the CPC's 232 training grant. He was a central part of CPC's statistical core, where he advised faculty, students, and staff in the application of demographic techniques, and also later in power analysis and how to take account of complex sample designs. I have spoken of Suchi's tremendous knowledge and expertise, but there's something else about Suchi so very important. Suchi was that member of every team that made the team better. And I really wish we had an award for that. It was such a gift to all of us at the University of North Carolina and at CPC. I don't know how you organize your memories, but sound plays an important place in mine. I remember what people sound like better than I remember what they look like. With Suchi, it's easy because he had such a distinctive way about him and such a distinctive laugh. If you knew him, you knew that laugh. I think of that laugh now, and I hope that he's well pleased with what he accomplished over his lifetime. Thank you.
This concludes our memorials this evening, and I'd like to thank all of you who gathered here, as well as all the PAA members who notified us when they learned of the death of a member, and again to thank my committee and the PAA staff. As long as we remember them, they live on with us. They live on in their students and in the work that has influenced us. And you help them live on by remembering them here tonight. So thank you all for being here, and good evening. And for those of you who are present here in the room, there will be a recording of this session, and we'll make sure that PAA people get notified about how to get access to that recording.
Find out what is a holy bell. After midnight, we gonna let it all hang. We're gonna cause talk and suspicion, give them some vision, find out